Guys, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. I am so friggin' excited for Christmas, you guys. I am also really sad that this 12 days of Christmas is coming to an end, but I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have, and if you have, please make sure to give this video a big thumbs up for me. Hey, you gonna tell him, Mia? Oh, did I wake you up? I'm sorry. Just tell him, hey? Give me a thumbs up. Thanks. So before we get into today's case, I do just want to mention that this video is sponsored by June's Journey. So basically you have to find these objects hidden in these beautifully crafted scenes, but the cool thing about it is that each scene takes you further into a murder mystery that is set in the 1920s, where a woman named June Parker is trying to solve the murder of her sister. And the best thing about this game is that not only is it so relaxing, like I love to do this when I'm trying to relax, take a break from editing, or when I'm pampering myself, having a bath. So yeah, it's really relaxing, but at the same time it is really interesting and so intriguing because you just are going through this murder mystery. So it's really fun. I'm going to have all of the information about that down in the description box below if you guys do want to check it out, but make sure you do because it is so fun and intriguing and relaxing and soothing at the same time. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's case, where we're going to be talking about the murder of Kris Jenkins. So Kris Jenkins was a 21-year-old student at the University of Minnesota, and he was doing really well for himself. He was popular, super well liked, and he was really confident but easygoing at the same time, and he was really smart as well. He was doing a business degree at the Carlson School of Management, which is basically like a business school at the University of Minnesota. He was an honor student, he had a near perfect GPA, and he was also the two-time captain of the lacrosse team. He had a bunch of job interviews lined up for when he finished school because he was almost finished his degree, and he was just doing really well for himself.
Kris was just fun. I mean, he was fun to be with. He did silly things. You kind of never knew what he was going to do next. Kind of the jokester, impish in a way. He made life not just the destination or the end goal. He made every day an adventure. And he's the kind of kid that woke up in the morning, and whether he said it or not, you could see in his eyes, I wonder what today's going to hold. What's out there for me to discover today?
So on Halloween night, and this is in 2002 by the way, his girlfriend Ashley Rice and a few of his friends decided to go out and celebrate. And they were all dressed up. He was wearing a Native American costume, and his girlfriend Ashley was wearing like a sexy police officer costume. And they first decided to go to a keg party. And I read some reports that this keg party was at his apartment, but that just doesn't make sense to me unless it was a keg party just with him and his few group of friends, or if they left the keg party while everyone else was still at his apartment, which doesn't make sense, or if like the keg party ended early. I don't know, I just read some reports that it was at his apartment, but I'm skeptical that it was because he and his friends left at 10:30, and one of his friends drove. They went down to downtown Minneapolis and they went to a place called the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. So his friend parked just south of the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, and then they walked over and they were having a really good time, and at some point Kris spilt a drink on his pants. So a little after midnight, Kris actually got kicked out. There was an off-duty police officer there. His name was Mike Casey, and I guess he saw the stain on Kris's pants and thought that he was like super intoxicated, that he like peed himself. So he got him kicked out. He told the bouncers not to let him back in. And a little bit about Mike Casey as well. As I said, he was an off-duty police officer, and on that night, Halloween night, he was working as security for the Heplin Center of the Arts, which was adjacent to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. And the way that he even met Kris and saw the stain on his pants is because Kris's girlfriend Ashley introduced Mike and Kris because she worked at the bar. So they knew each other, and in fact, she was actually borrowing his shirt for her like sexy schoolgirl or sexy police officer outfit. And she introduced them, and he saw the stain and like kicked him out. And then after Kris got kicked out, Mike apparently was with Ashley the whole night, flirting with her, and then when the bar closed, he drove her home. And I don't know about you guys, but I just found it a little bit weird. I was like, how well do you know him that you were wearing his shirt? Like, did you ask him for the shirt? Or I know that co-workers get close, but the fact that he was like super flirtatious with her, and he has a wife and kids, by the way, and I'm not going to get into it too much now. I'm going to give my thoughts on this later, and I think that you guys will see why I found this a little bit weird as we get further into the case. But anyway, so Kris got kicked out. He told the bouncers not to let him back in, and it was 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -6 degrees Celsius. So it was freezing. He was only wearing his costume. He didn't have his wallet. He didn't have his phone. He didn't have his identification, so he didn't have any way to contact his friends inside, because as I said, he got driven to the Lone Tree Bar, so he didn't have any way of getting home, couldn't contact anyone. And side note here, I found it so strange that nobody left with him. Like, I know for a fact if Kerry got kicked out of a bar, I would 100% go with him. I wouldn't stay in flirting with a police officer, which is another reason I find that weird. But I don't know how it works with guys, but I know if my friends got kicked out, I would leave with my friend as well. Like, I wouldn't let them just go out alone, especially if it was -6 degrees. Like, I just thought that was really shitty on his friends and his girlfriend. So anyway, he is super drunk and doesn't have any way to get in contact with anybody. So it is assumed that, or theorized that he decided to walk home because, you know, what else is he gonna do? But by the next morning, November 1st, he was nowhere to be found. Nobody could get in contact with him. His mum or his family started to worry, and they contacted the police, who basically said, okay, you need to relax, and they said they weren't going to do anything, and they theorized that he had just walked home. He went to the Hennepin Avenue Bridge, and then at some point he decided to stay with somebody else, which, hello, that makes absolutely no sense. I don't know what they were thinking, because he's not going to go and stay with some random person, but none of his friends had seen or heard from him, and he wasn't with any of them. So his family were not good with this. They were really worried about him. The police were being super unhelpful, so they had to organize their own search party where friends, family, people from his school, people even from rival lacrosse teams all pitched in to try and help find Kris. They searched the downtown area, they searched the Hennepin Bridge, they searched nearby bridges, creeks, but nobody could find him anywhere. So the Jenkins family, because police were still being super unhelpful, decided to hire a private investigator named Chuck Leash. And the first thing that Chuck did was go and get surveillance footage from surveillance camera. There was the Federal Reserve Bank, and they had 2 security cameras facing the Hepplin Avenue Bridge that police theorized that he walked down, because that was the quickest way to get back to his house. And he looked on them, and there was no sign of him. He looked on the night of the 31st, the morning of the 1st of November, no sign of him whatsoever. And the people at the bank said that there was no way he could get across that bridge without being seen on those cameras. So Leash then went and questioned the staff at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, and they actually said that Kris didn't get kicked out at all, that he left on his own. And then the owner of the Lone Tree Bar went and hired an attorney and issued a gag order saying that nobody could speak to anybody unless their attorney was present. So then Leash went and questioned some witnesses, and a whole bunch of people said that they saw 10 unidentified people attacking an unidentified person out front of a restaurant called the Times Square Subs and Pubs. And it's still like uncertain as to whether or not this was Kris, but this happened in the very early hours of the 1st of November, or the very, like, between the 31st going on to the 1st. So the Jenkins family also decided to hire and pay for some K9 units, and the specific dogs that they had sniffed out missing people within minutes. So they were very well trained and very highly qualified. And on the 7th of November and the 8th of November, they had 2 separate dogs. So one dog went on the 7th of November, one dog went on the 8th of November, and they traced Kris's scent from the Lone Tree Bar and Grill to the Times Square Pubs and Subs restaurant, and then to a nearby parking garage, specifically to lots 89 and 90. And while they were looking around the area, they found feathers, they found pieces of red string, and they also found blood. So the feathers and the pieces of red string absolutely could have come from Kris's costume. But now what's crazy about this is the police discarded all of this evidence before even testing it. Kris obviously had no connection to these spots at all. I mean, his friend literally drove him to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. They parked right near it, so they weren't anywhere near the restaurant or the parking garage. So he had no reason to be at this parking garage. So it kind of led investigators to believe that somebody had transported him somewhere using some sort of vehicle. And this was kind of confirmed as well when the canine units went from lot 89 and 90. They brought new canines. They went from lot 89 and 90. They went straight into traffic and they followed the scent for 4.4 miles until they got to a northbound ramp of Interstate 94. So the next step was obviously to look into if somebody had occupied lots 89 and 90 on Halloween night. And sure enough, somebody had occupied those spots, and it was actually one of the bouncers from the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. So this is where it gets super shady to me, is they brought in the canine units to sniff his car. The dogs got a mild hit for Kris's scent in the car, and they didn't follow it up. That was it. They were just like, okay, cool. They've smelt Kris's scent in your car. No problems. You're clear. And on top of that, something I forgot to mention before about Mike Casey is they never went to question him about any of this because he had a wife and kids and they didn't want to disrupt or break up a family. So this is all so incredibly sketchy to me, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So there really wasn't anything else to go on. There wasn't any new leads. The leads that they had, they decided to discard the evidence and not follow up on them for some reason. It wasn't until the 27th of February in 2003 that Kris's body was actually found in a very large branch under the 3rd Avenue Bridge next to the Upper St. Anthony Falls Dam. Police were able to identify him almost immediately because he was wearing the same costume that he went out in on the night that he died. It was completely intact. He had 2 rings, one on each of his index fingers. His slippers were still on. His shirt was tucked in. They also found blonde hair clutched in his hand, which they sent away for testing. And they said that it was his, but it turns out they stuffed up the testing and it got, I'm forgetting English. What's the word where contaminated? So it got contaminated or messed up or something, so they actually couldn't conclusively say who the hair belonged to. And apparently police didn't find this sketchy either because they theorized that he either jumped or he accidentally fell in from the Hennepin Avenue Bridge and he had been in there since the day that he disappeared. So the hair wasn't sketchy to them. The fact that he had been in there apparently for 5 months and everything was still intact, his shoes, his slippers were still on, none of that was shady to them. The medical examiner found no signs of foul play, so he ruled the death as undetermined. Now, his family was not buying the police's theory. There were just way too many discrepancies in this for it to have been an accident or suicide. First of all, he wasn't showing any signs of depression according to his family. He had so much going for him and he was really excited about his future. He had all these job interviews lined up, and for it to have been an accidental death as well, for him to have been in the water for 118 days and his clothes to be completely intact, shirt tucked in, everything, for none of it to be ruined. And also something really sketchy was that he had no broken bones and no bruises, which you think. So the first reason that this is sketchy is because you'd think if he jumped or fell in, he would have some sort of broken bone, some sort of bruise. Not only that, but his parents said he constantly had bruises on his legs because of lacrosse. And he had a training session just 2 days before, so he was actively playing lacrosse and would have had bruises. So his parents think that he must have been kept alive somewhere, at least until his bruises faded. During a later autopsy, they found, oh, bye Mia. Oh, you just want to come and sleep here, that's fine too. So during a later autopsy, they found that he had a blood alcohol level of between 0.9 and 0.12, and they also found traces of GHB in his system, but GHB is a substance that occurs naturally in the body, so it didn't mean that he had been drugged or anything like that. The autopsy also determined that the hair that was clutched in his hand had actually been placed there post-mortem and didn't match the hair on his head. Now, the weirdest part of this entire autopsy was the fact that the weight of both of his lungs combined was less than the weight of one healthy lung. And this was extremely weird and shocking because he was a lacrosse player. He was a healthy athlete, and both his lungs weighed less than one normal healthy lung. Now, despite all of these findings, it actually wasn't until 2006 when the Jenkins family met with the newly appointed Minneapolis police chief, whose name was Tim Dolan, that he decided to reopen the case after they showed him all of the evidence. Now, the same year that the case was reopened, there was actually a prisoner who was in jail for murder who came out and said that he witnessed an acquaintance of his throw Kris over the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. And police didn't really look into this. Actually, they didn't close this until 2007. They stopped looking into him, which is weird because it literally would have been impossible. His story didn't make sense because he was saying that just one guy threw him in, and Kris was a nearly 90-kilo man. One person would have had to pick him up, throw him over a high safety rail, at the same time throwing him out 4 to 5 feet because there were these big steel beams, and they would have had to do this while avoiding the big metal cables. At the same time, not being seen by the cameras or any passers-by.
About the theory that he was thrown off a bridge. That really couldn't have happened. The people that the police were saying were suspects couldn't physically have done it. If you've been to the bridge, and I've been to the bridge, there's a pretty wide gap that you would have to weasel your way off and then throw someone over. It would be virtually impossible to do it with just one person.
On top of this, none of the evidence at all pointed to Kris having been in the water the night of his disappearance. Now, hydrologists at the University of Minnesota, they profile every aspect of the Mississippi River, and they said that his body would have had to come from about a mile away. So nowhere near downtown Minnesota, nowhere near the Hennepin Bridge. A forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Baden also said that the position that Kris's body was found in wasn't consistent with the position that drowning victims are usually found in. So they're usually found face down with their heads tucked into their chin and their arms kind of out to their sides. But Kris was found on his back, his head was facing up, his head was also slightly to the right, and his hands were in fists and his arms were across his chest. He also said that usually their clothes, specifically their shoes, are almost always missing and ruined, but Kris's had both of his shoes on, he had jewelry on, his shirt was still tucked in, completely intact, not at all ruined. Now, on top of this, the night of his disappearance, the river was actually frozen over, and it wasn't until January 31st of 2003, so quite a few months later, 3 or 4 months later, that I think it's called thawing, where it gets a little bit hot and the ice starts to melt. That didn't happen until January 31st. It was completely frozen for that 3 to 4 month period. And so his body, if it was in there, would have been super obvious because it would have been on top of the ice and somebody absolutely would have seen it. Now, to further the fact that his death was not an accident and there was some sort of foul play involved, there were actually insects burrowed underneath his skin, and these insects cannot survive in winter and they also cannot survive in water, which makes it seem as though he was, or points to the fact that he was actually kept indoors somewhere after he was deceased before he was put in the river. Forensic experts Kevin Gammon and Lee Gilbertson actually believe that his body was placed in the river on the 27th of February, so the same day that it was discovered. And this obviously just confirms that his body was placed in there by somebody, because he was very obviously dead before he was placed in the river. And on top of that, the fact that he was missing for so many months until his body was found, it all just points to some sort of foul play. Okay, so let's talk about theories. Now, in July of 2007, the Hennepin County District's Attorney's Office said that they had been approached to file charges against somebody but declined to do so. Now, based on the information they provided, a lot of people theorized that the man they were talking about was a man named Jeremy Alford, and he's currently in prison for the murder of a man named Douglas Miller. He was also a regular patron of the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in 2002, but that is all of the information that I could find on him, so I guess he must have some sort of alibi for them to have declined charging him. Now, another theory is that this was a suicide, but obviously, considering everything that I've told you guys, I think this is so incredibly unlikely, not only because he didn't show any signs of depression and was really excited for his future and lining up job interviews, but also just all of the evidence points to him have been deceased before being put in the water, and also the fact that he was placed in the water by somebody else. Now, the next theory, and this is kind of a big theory, is that this was the work of the Smiley Face Gang. And I've actually seen a few comments on my channel of people requesting me to do a video on just the Smiley Face Gang alone. But the Smiley Face Gang is basically like a group of serial killers. So multiple serial killers who target college-aged men who are intelligent and athletic and popular, like Kris. There have been 45 murders connected to this group since the 1990s, and they've happened over 11 different states and 25 different cities, but most of them most of the victims went to colleges near the I-94 corridor in the Midwest, like Kris did. Almost all of the murders took place after a night out drinking, and all of the bodies were found in bodies of water. Now, all but 2 of these 45 murders have been classed as accidents, all except for Kris Jenkins and Patrick McNeil. And Patrick McNeil's death is like super similar to Kris's, like eerily similar. So Patrick went to Fordham University in New York, and in 1997 he went out with a group of friends drinking and disappeared after he left the bar. So a few months later he was found in the East River, and just like Kris, he was found face up. He had insects burrowed underneath his skin, and he had been put in the river only a day before he was discovered. Patrick died of strangulation, and what makes this weird is that Kris's lungs look like he was suffocated to death. So because of the weight of his lungs, it's theorized that he was maybe in a drug-induced state when he was suffocated slowly, and that somebody put a bag over his head while he was unconscious, and then he slowly suffocated to death. So while it's not the same exact type of death, strangulation as opposed to suffocation, it's still like a similar way for them to die. And the reason people think that, now the way that all of these deaths are connected, I'm sure you guys have guessed, is because they have a smiley face graffitied somewhere near where the body was discovered. Now, there was no smiley face discovered where Kris's body was discovered, but I also believe that I read that there wasn't smiley faces found at every single one of these 45 murders. So whether that means they're not connected, whether they got lazy or somebody didn't find the smiley face, or, you know, it is a gang of serial killers. So maybe that's why they're not consistent in that. But the fact that, you know, some of these smiley faces aren't missing, or the fact that Kris's wasn't there, is the reason a lot of people believe that the Smiley Face Gang doesn't even exist. The Minneapolis PD and the FBI refused to even look into it because they didn't believe that it was connected. There was no smiley face, and they don't believe that the Smiley Face Gang is a thing. Now, the last theory is, I actually haven't read much about this theory or seen a lot about it, but this theory, when I was researching this case, this is all I could think about the entire time, is that this was the off-duty police officer or one of the bouncers. So this off-duty police officer, Mike Casey, kicks Kris out, and then he's flirting with his girlfriend all night, and then he drives her home and she's wearing his top. So like, it made me wonder, like, how close are they that she is borrowing his top? Like, I know that they're co-workers, but the fact that they were flirting, like, maybe the top wouldn't be that weird if they weren't flirting and he didn't drive her home afterwards, and then they didn't want to question his parents his family, because they didn't want to break up a family. Like, that is so incredibly sus to me. He worked with the bodyguard, obviously, and the bodyguard's car had a mild hit of Kris's scent in it, so maybe they worked together. And the fact that he was a cop, like, and the fact that so many, like, things were done badly by the police, like, it just makes me think that he had something to do with it, because they discarded the blood evidence before it was tested. They stuffed up the evidence with the hair in his hand. They didn't look into the bodyguard even more, even though his car was in the spot that Kris's scent was, and his scent was in the car, and they just didn't even want to look into it at first. Like, the parents had to hire their own sniffer dogs. They had to hire a private investigator, and I don't know. The whole thing just kind of seemed like a cover-up to me, and it was nagging at me the entire time. It just seems so incredibly sketchy, but that is everything. I would love to know what you guys think, any theories you have, or what theories you believe. And thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!